The last signature. The lawyer's office was quiet in a way that made every small sound feel louder than it should have been. The hum of the air conditioner, the faint scrape of a chair leg against the floor, the slow, deliberate breathing of two people who no longer knew how to speak to each other. Clara sat with her hands folded in her lap, her gaze fixed on a point somewhere between the window and the stack of documents on the table. Eduardo stood beside her, jacket still on, phone face down in his palm as if work might call him at any second and save him from this moment. "Everything is ready," the lawyer said gently, sliding the papers forward. "We just need your signatures." Clara was the first to move. She picked up the pen, her fingers trembling only slightly, and signed her name with calm precision. No tears, no hesitation. Just a single breath in, a single breath out, and it was done. Eduardo watched her, surprised by how easily she seemed to let go. He had expected anger, accusations, one last attempt to make him stay, but Clara offered none of that. She didn't even look at him. When it was his turn, he signed quickly, almost impatiently, as if this were another contract he needed to finalize before the next meeting. The pen scratched against the paper, sealing the end of a marriage that had quietly unraveled long before this room. Clara stood. "That's all," she said, her voice steady. Eduardo nodded, unsure why a strange pressure settled in his chest. He told himself it was relief, freedom, the right decision. They walked out separately. In the hallway, Clara paused for a brief second, her hand resting against her abdomen, a gesture so small and instinctive that Eduardo never noticed. Then she straightened, lifted her chin, and continued toward the elevator without looking back. Eduardo remained behind, already checking his phone.
Unaware that what Clara carried with her that day was far more than a signature, and that the silence he felt now was only the beginning. The silence that followed the divorce was not new. It had lived between them for years, quietly expanding, filling every corner of their marriage, long before the papers were signed. In the beginning, Eduardo had been different. He used to come home early, loosen his tie, and sit beside Clara on the couch while she talked about her day. They laughed over simple things, burnt dinners, unfinished movies, plans that felt infinite because time still belonged to them. But success arrived faster than love could adapt. Meetings replaced dinners. Business trips replaced weekends. "Just one more project," Eduardo would say, kissing her forehead as he checked his phone. Clara nodded every time, convincing herself that patience was a form of devotion. She learned to eat alone. Some nights she waited with the lights on, listening to the clock tick past midnight. Other nights she turned them off before he came home, pretending she was already asleep so she wouldn't have to see the apology in his eyes, or the relief when she didn't ask anything at all. Eduardo told himself he was building a future for them. Bigger apartment, better schools, security. He never noticed how often Clara's smiles faded before he finished his sentences, or how her questions slowly turned into silence. When she tried to talk, he postponed. When she cried, he reassured, briefly. When she stopped asking, he felt grateful. The mistake was not a single betrayal or a dramatic fight. It was repetition, the daily choice to prioritize what could wait over what could not, the belief that love was permanent, immune to neglect. By the time Eduardo sensed something was wrong, Clara had already learned how to survive without him, emotionally, quietly, completely. And that was the moment the marriage truly ended, even though neither of them knew it yet. The apartment felt larger after Clara left. Eduardo noticed it the first night he returned alone. The echo of his footsteps in the hallway, the untouched side of the bed, the faint scent of her perfume still clinging to the curtains, as if the space itself hadn't yet accepted that she was gone. He dropped his keys on the counter and loosened his tie, waiting for a familiar sound that never came. No kitchen drawers, no soft music, no quiet question asking how his day had been. For the first time in years, there was nothing demanding his attention. Clara, meanwhile, boarded a bus at dawn with a single suitcase and a heart that felt heavier than anything she carried. She didn't leave a note. She didn't call. Not because she hated him, but because she knew she wouldn't be strong enough if she heard his voice again. Eduardo sent one message that night. "Did you arrive safely?" When no reply came, he told himself she needed space.
He buried the unease under spreadsheets, late meetings, and long hours at the office. It was easier to be busy than to sit with the emptiness waiting for him at home. Days turned into weeks. Her name disappeared from his notifications, her habits from his routine. Still, sometimes he reached for his phone out of reflex, expecting to see her name on the screen. Each time, disappointment flickered, small enough to ignore, large enough to return. Clara settled into a small, mented room in another city, listening to unfamiliar sounds outside her window. She pressed a hand to her abdomen more often now, grounding herself in the quiet certainty that she was not alone anymore. Eduardo didn't know that while he was learning how to live without her, Clara was learning how to live for someone else. And somewhere between unanswered messages and unopened doors, two separate lives quietly began to move forward, unaware of how tightly they would one day collide again. The city by the coast moved at a slower rhythm, and Clara needed that. Mornings smelled of salt and fresh bread, and the streets felt forgiving in a way the skyscrapers never had. She rented a small room above a bakery where the floors creaked and the walls were thin, but the silence felt kinder. It was there, surrounded by unfamiliar faces, that the truth could no longer be ignored. The doctor's office was modest, the walls painted a pale blue meant to calm anxious patients. Clara sat on the edge of the chair as the words settled into her body, into her future. "You're pregnant," the doctor said gently. Clara nodded, as if she had already known. She felt fear, yes, but beneath it, something steadier, a certainty. She thought of Eduardo only once, briefly, and the thought passed like a shadow. She did not reach for her phone. Telling him would mean explanations, negotiations, promises she had already learned not to trust. So she chose silence. Days turned into routines.
She found work at a local public school, helping in the library, organizing books, listening to children read aloud with serious concentration. The simplicity grounded her. Life became smaller, but clearer. At night, she lay awake with her hands resting on her growing abdomen, whispering reassurances to the life forming inside her. She promised safety, presence, love without conditions. There were moments when doubt crept in, questions about money, exhaustion, loneliness. But each time she reminded herself that waiting for Eduardo had once felt lonelier than this. Here, no one expected her to be invisible. As months passed, Clara began to change. Her posture straightened. Her voice grew firmer. She learned that strength did not always arrive loudly. It often arrived quietly, in the decision to move forward without asking for permission. And far away, Eduardo remained unaware that while he was losing memories he would never reclaim,
Clara was building a life that no longer included him at all. Success came quickly, as if it had been waiting for Eduardo to have nothing else left to distract him. Within a year, his company expanded into new markets, contracts multiplied, his name began to appear in business magazines, accompanied by words like visionary and relentless. He worked longer hours, traveled constantly, and accepted every invitation that promised growth. From the outside, it looked like victory. Inside, something was unraveling. Nights blurred together in hotel rooms that all looked the same. Eduardo lay awake, staring at ceilings he couldn't remember choosing, his mind racing through meetings already past and those still to come. When he slept, it was shallow and restless, interrupted by dreams he couldn't fully recall, only a lingering sense of loss when he woke. The apartment remained spotless, too spotless. Nothing was ever out of place, and nothing ever felt like home. Sometimes, when he returned late, he expected to hear movement from the bedroom or the kitchen, only to be met by silence that pressed against his chest. He stopped inviting people over. Food became something functional,
Conversations became transactions. Even celebrations felt hollow, reduced to handshakes and polite smiles. When colleagues asked about his personal life, he answered vaguely, redirecting the conversation back to work. It was easier that way. On rare evenings, Eduardo poured himself a drink and stood by the window, watching the city lights below. He told himself this was the price of ambition, that loneliness was temporary, that once everything was secure, he would finally have time. But time did not wait. Without realizing it, he had gained everything he once wanted, and lost the one thing that had made any of it meaningful. The truth surfaced quietly, in moments he refused to name. Eduardo had won the world, and somewhere along the way, he had lost everything else.
The invitation arrived like any other. Another charity event, another obligation tied to his company's public image. Eduardo barely glanced at the details before agreeing to attend. Appearances mattered, and he had long mastered the art of showing up without being present. The venue overlooked the ocean, bathed in warm lights and polished elegance. Conversations flowed easily around him as glasses clinked and soft music filled the air. Eduardo moved through the room with practiced confidence, greeting investors and partners, his smile automatic. Then he saw her. Clara stood near one of the large windows, listening to a woman beside her with calm attention. Her hair was shorter now, her posture straighter. She wore no jewelry beyond a simple necklace, yet there was something unmistakably different about her, something grounded, self-contained. For a brief moment, Eduardo wondered if he was mistaken, but when she turned, their eyes met.
And the years between them collapsed into a single, breathless second. Clara froze. She had known this day might come, had prepared herself for it in theory. In reality, the sight of him still unsettled her. Eduardo looked older, sharper around the edges, success carved into his expression. Powerful. Familiar. They approached each other slowly, surrounded by voices that suddenly felt distant. "Eduardo," she said first, her tone neutral. "Clara," he replied, surprised by how steady her name sounded on his lips. "I didn't know you were involved with this project." She nodded. "I work with the foundation, mostly behind the scenes." He studied her face, searching for signs of the woman he remembered, the one who waited, who bent herself around his absences. He found none of that. What stood before him was someone whole. "You look well," he said. "So do you." The words were polite, controlled, and carefully empty. An awkward pause followed, heavy with unspoken history. Eduardo felt an unfamiliar tightness in his chest. He wanted to ask where she had been, how she had managed alone, why she had never reached out. Instead, he said nothing. Clara excused herself moments later, leaving him standing there with questions he had never learned how to ask. As she walked away, Eduardo realized that the silence between them no longer belonged to the past. It belonged to something unfinished. The documents arrived on Eduardo's desk the following morning. At first, he skimmed them absent-mindedly, financial summaries, internal reports, names he recognized and others he didn't. It was routine, until one line made him stop. Clara Mendez. Her name appeared beside a series of irregular transactions linked to the foundation his company funded. Numbers that didn't align, signatures authorizing transfers that should never have happened. Eduardo's jaw tightened. He read everything again, slower this time. The evidence was circumstantial but unsettling.
Funds diverted, accounts temporarily emptied and refilled, and always her name attached to the approvals. A familiar feeling rose in his chest: control, order, the instinct to confront before being questioned himself. He requested a meeting immediately. Clara arrived an hour later, her expression composed but alert. She took the seat across from him, folding her hands neatly on the table. "You wanted to see me?" Eduardo slid the papers toward her without ceremony. "I need an explanation." She read silently, her brow furrowing, not with guilt, but confusion. "This isn't me," she said calmly. "Those approvals aren't mine." "The signatures match," Eduardo replied. His tone was sharp, professional. "And the timing is too convenient." Clara looked up, meeting his gaze without flinching. "You think I would risk my work, my life here, for this?" He hesitated for a fraction of a second, just long enough to betray doubt. But his pride pushed forward.
"I think you disappeared without a word," he said. "I think you reappeared connected to money that doesn't belong to you, and I think that looks bad." The words landed heavier than he intended. Clara inhaled slowly. "You don't trust me," she said, more as an observation than an accusation. Eduardo didn't answer. Silence stretched between them, thick and uncomfortable. Finally, Clara stood. "I won't beg you," she said. "I didn't then, and I won't now. The truth will come out." She turned to leave, stopping only once at the door. "And if you're wrong," she added quietly, "this will be the second time you walk away without listening." When she left, Eduardo remained seated, staring at the empty chair. For the first time since their reunion, certainty slipped from his grasp, and something deeper, more dangerous, took its place. The confrontation left a tension that neither of them could escape. Later that afternoon, Clara stepped outside the foundation building.
The ocean breeze brushing against her face. She needed air, space to steady herself before returning to work. Her mind replayed Eduardo's words again and again, not because they hurt, but because they confirmed what she had always known. He still didn't see her. "Mom!" The voice cut through her thoughts like a thread pulled too hard. Before she could turn, small footsteps rushed toward her. 2 children ran across the sidewalk, their laughter bright and unrestrained. Clara knelt instinctively, opening her arms as they collided with her, wrapping themselves around her neck. Eduardo, who had followed her outside intending to say something, anything, froze where he stood. The world seemed to narrow to that single scene. "Mom, you promised ice cream," one of them said. "And you said today," the other added, grinning. Clara smiled, brushing hair from their foreheads. "I know, we're going." Eduardo's breath caught. The children were around 5 years old, twins. He saw it immediately, the symmetry, the familiarity that struck him with unsettling force. One had his eyes, the other carried the same small mark near the chin that he had inherited from his own father. His chest tightened painfully. Clara stood slowly, turning to find Eduardo staring at them. The moment she saw his face, she knew. There was no hiding it now. No careful explanation that could soften what was about to land between them. "These are my children," she said quietly. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. The boy looked up at Eduardo with innocent curiosity. "Who's he, Mom?" Clara hesitated, just long enough for the truth to settle in the space between them. Eduardo stepped closer, his voice barely above a whisper. "How old are they?" 5, she answered. The math was instant, brutal, irrefutable. The air around them seemed to vanish as realization crashed over him. His knees felt weak, his thoughts disordered. 5 years of birthdays, first words, first steps.
Lives lived without him. Clara met his gaze, steady and unyielding. "They were conceived before the divorce," she said. "That's all you need to know right now." Eduardo stared at the children again, at the life he had never known existed. In that moment, every accusation, every assumption, every certainty he had clung to shattered completely. And the silence that followed was no longer empty. It was deafening. They sat on a wooden bench facing the ocean, the twins a short distance away, focused on building something fragile and determined in the sand. The sound of the waves filled the spaces where words refused to come. Eduardo kept his hands clasped tightly together,
as if letting go might cause him to fall apart. He had asked Clara to talk. She had agreed, not for him, but because avoiding the conversation would only prolong what was inevitable. "They don't know who you are," she said at last, her eyes following the children. "To them, you're just a stranger."
He nodded slowly. The truth settled like weight on his chest. "I didn't know," he said. "If I had—" "You didn't ask," Clara interrupted, her voice calm but firm. "And I couldn't wait for you to notice me anymore." She told him about the night she found out, the fear, the decision to leave the city, the months of nausea and exhaustion, the doctor visits she attended alone. She spoke of the hospital room, the moment she held them for the first time, realizing that her life had changed forever. Eduardo listened, each word carving something out of him. "There were nights I thought about calling," she admitted, "but every time I remembered how alone I felt when you were still there." The twins laughed, and Eduardo flinched at the sound, beautiful and painful all at once. "I missed everything," he said quietly. "Yes," Clara replied. "You did." There was no accusation in her tone, only truth. He wanted to promise change, to swear he would be different now.
The words rose to his throat but stopped there. He understood, finally, that promises meant nothing when they arrived too late. "They have a good life," Clara continued. "They are safe, loved. That's all that matters to me." Eduardo looked at the children again, recognizing pieces of himself in movements he had never taught them. A grief unlike anything he had known settled deep inside him. For the first time, he understood that loss was not always loud. Sometimes it was measured in memories you would never get back. Eduardo did not sleep that night. Clara's words replayed endlessly in his mind, blending with images of the twins' faces, their laughter echoing where his thoughts should have been. By morning, the weight of guilt had hardened into something sharper: determination. If there was even a chance he had been wrong, he needed to know. He arrived at the office before sunrise and requested full access to the Foundation's internal records, not summaries.
Not filtered reports. Everything. He worked methodically, tracing transactions backward, following patterns most people would have overlooked. What he found made his stomach turn. The approvals tied to Clara's name had been routed through an internal administrator, someone with temporary access privileges during a system update. The digital signature was a replication, not an original. Legal, clean, and deliberately misleading. It had been planned. Eduardo leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes. The realization settled heavily. Clara hadn't just been accused. She had been framed. By noon, he had identified the source. A mid-level executive within the Foundation, desperate to cover his own misconduct. Clara had been the perfect shield. Quiet. Trusted. Disconnected from power. Just like she had always been with him. He called the Foundation's legal team immediately, instructing them to freeze the investigation and prepare a formal retraction. Publicly. Unambiguously. No conditions. When he finally allowed himself to pause, the truth hit harder than the evidence ever could. He had doubted her without hesitation, questioned her integrity, repeated the same mistake he had made throughout their marriage, choosing certainty over listening. Eduardo stared at the city beyond his office window, his reflection faintly visible in the glass. For the first time, the man looking back at him did not feel powerful. He felt small, and for the first time in years, he knew exactly where he had gone wrong. Eduardo found Clara that evening near the shore, the twins chasing the last traces of daylight as the sky slowly darkened. She watched them with quiet attention, the kind that came from being fully present, something he recognized now as a language he had never learned. "I cleared your name," he said, stopping beside her. "The investigation was wrong. It will be made public."
Clara turned to face him.
surprise flickering across her expression before settling into calm. "Good," she said simply. "That's what was right." He hesitated. There was something else, something heavier, tightening his chest. "I can make sure you're protected," he continued. "The foundation, the school, the children's future. I have the means." "I'm not asking for anything," Clara replied. "I know," Eduardo said, and that was exactly the problem. Silence stretched between them, filled only by the sound of the waves. Eduardo watched the twins run back toward them, laughing, and felt desperation rise, sharp, unfiltered. He had already lost too much. "There is one thing," he said finally, his voice lower. "One night, just us. No lawyers, no conditions after. I need closure." Clara stared at him, disbelief flashing briefly before fading into something colder. She understood immediately what he was doing, offering security wrapped in nostalgia, power disguised as longing. "For the children," he added quietly.
Let me make things stable for them. The truth sat between them, unspoken but undeniable. Clara looked toward the twins. They deserved safety, certainty, a future without fear. She exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of every compromise she had ever made, and the difference between then and now. "One night," she said at last, "for them, not for us." Eduardo nodded, relief and shame colliding inside him. He had what he wanted, or so he thought. As Clara walked away to gather the children, Eduardo remained where he was, unaware that this was not a negotiation he could win. Because some nights don't restore what was broken. They only reveal what can never be reclaimed. The night unfolded quietly, stripped of the expectations Eduardo had carried into it. There were no dramatic confessions, no desperate attempts to relive what had once been. They spoke in low voices, sitting across from each other as strangers who shared too much history to pretend otherwise. The air between them felt heavy, not with desire, but with truths long avoided. Clara did not stay long. When she stood to leave, Eduardo felt panic rise, an instinctive reach for control he no longer possessed. "It doesn't have to end like this," he said, the words sounding hollow even to him. "It already did," Clara replied gently. She told him then what he had never truly understood, that love had not disappeared overnight. It had faded through waiting, through being unseen, through choosing solitude over disappointment. She spoke without anger, without bitterness, only clarity. Eduardo listened, finally, with nothing left to defend. "I don't regret loving you," Clara said. "I regret losing myself while doing it." The words stayed with him long after she left. Days passed. The retraction was published. Apologies followed. Eduardo ensured the twins' future was secure, not as a bargaining chip, but as a responsibility he could no longer deny. He met them slowly, carefully, learning how to exist in their lives without demanding space he had not earned. Clara watched from a distance, protective but fair. She did not close the door, but she did not open it wider than necessary. One evening, Eduardo stood alone on his balcony, the city lights below familiar yet distant. He thought of the man he had been, of the choices that once felt insignificant and now defined everything. Some losses, he understood at last, were not punishments. They were lessons. And some love stories did not end with reunion, but with acceptance of what was lost, of what remained, and of the quiet truth that not all endings were meant to be rewritten. The world had once been his. Now all he could do was learn how to live with what he had finally learned to see.